It was just another ordinary autumn afternoon in Manhattan. The streets buzzing with the hum of city life, the sharp edge of October's chill biting through the cracks of warm coats. Marina Krim had just wrapped up her day at work, her mind already shifting to the comfort of home. All she could think about was seeing her children, Lucia and Leo, their laughter filling the quiet apartment as they played after school. But as she turned the corner onto the familiar street where she lived, something felt off. A sinking feeling in her stomach grew with each step closer to the building. She quickly dismissed it, chalking it up to the stress of her day. She couldn't wait to get inside, to hug her kids and unwind. Little did she know her world was about to unravel in ways she could never have imagined. She entered the apartment building, nodding at the doorman, a brief moment of normalcy before the elevator doors closed behind her. The trip up seemed longer than usual, the silence in the car amplifying the thumping of her heartbeat. When the elevator finally chimed, she stepped out into the hallway, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She stopped in her tracks. The door to their apartment was ajar. Her heart skipped. She called out for Lucia and Leo, but the apartment remained eerily quiet. The door creaked as she pushed it open, the smell of something strange, something metallic, immediately hitting her nose. She froze, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. The living room was scattered with toys and art supplies, as if the children had been in the middle of something before everything changed. The air was heavy, thick with an unsettling silence. And then she saw them. Lucia and Leo, her beautiful children, lay lifeless on the floor. The sight was grotesque, unnatural. Both children were covered in blood, their small bodies violated in ways no child should ever experience. A scream tore itself from Marina's throat, but it wasn't the one she expected to hear. It was quieter, almost strangled, as if the horror had stolen her voice. As her knees buckled beneath her, she saw a figure slumped against the wall. Jocelyn Ortega, the nanny, sat there. Her hands stained with blood, her face vacant and hollow. Her chest heaved in shallow breaths, as if she were barely clinging to life. Marina's world collapsed around her. The image of her children, her babies, etched into her mind, an indelible mark of pain and horror. She couldn't move, could barely breathe. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone, calling 911, but the words wouldn't come. The operator's voice echoed in her ears, but all she could think about was the stillness, the unnerving quiet of the apartment. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what had happened, of how this could happen. The minutes felt like hours as she waited for help to arrive, the room growing darker with every passing second. Every glance at Jocelyn sent shivers down her spine, her lifeless, hollow eyes staring into nothing. Marina couldn't tear her eyes away. It was as if Jocelyn was already a ghost, a harbinger of the nightmare that had unfolded in her home. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the stillness, and paramedics rushed into the apartment. The world moved in a blur, but Marina could only focus on one thing: her children. The paramedics confirmed what she already knew. Her children were gone, taken in the most horrific of ways. And in that moment, Marina knew something far more chilling than the brutal murder of her children. This wasn't just an attack, it was a message. A message from someone who had been inside their home, inside their lives. Someone who knew them. Someone they had trusted. The investigation would later uncover that Jocelyn Ortega, the nanny they hired, had been hiding a troubled past, mental instability, a history of deceit, and a deeply disturbed mind. But none of that mattered now. The lives of Lucia and Leo were gone, taken in an instant by the one person Marina had trusted most in the world. As the detectives combed through the scene, Marina remained frozen, unable to tear her eyes away from her children's bodies. The horror of the night would never leave her, but the worst part was yet to come. The trial of Jocelyn Ortega would expose the deepest horrors, not just of what had happened that day, but of the haunting truth that there was evil in the most unexpected places, right under their roof. The days after the murders felt like a blur for Marina Krim. Each passing moment brought new, chilling revelations about the woman she had invited into her home, someone she had trusted with the most precious people in her life. Jocelyn Ortega, the nanny, was taken to a hospital after she had slashed her own throat, attempting to end her life after carrying out the unimaginable act. The police, after stabilizing her, arrested her on the spot. The shock of seeing her there, bleeding and confused, was only a small part of the horror that would soon unfold. As the trial began, Marina and her husband, Kevin Krim, sat in the front row of the courtroom. They were surrounded by journalists, reporters, and spectators, but all Marina could focus on was the woman sitting across from her, Jocelyn Ortega. Her once calm demeanor had turned frantic, her eyes wide and vacant. She seemed detached, almost robotic, as the prosecution laid out the gruesome details of the murders. The graphic images of her children's lifeless bodies were displayed on the screen for all to see. The courtroom fell silent, the weight of the images too much for anyone to bear. The defense team argued that Ortega was mentally unstable, that her actions were the result of a psychological breakdown. They pointed to her history of depression, the signs of mental illness that had gone untreated, the manipulations she had used to get hired in the first place. They claimed that the nanny hadn't meant to kill the children, that it was an impulsive, uncontrollable act. But the prosecution was relentless. They painted a picture of intentional murder, a calculated act driven by jealousy and resentment. As the weeks dragged on, Marina's grief deepened. Each day in court was another reminder of her children's absence. But there was no escaping the truth. This was happening. Jocelyn Ortega was responsible for the deaths of Lucia and Leo, and no amount of defense could change that. As the case neared its conclusion, the testimonies grew more emotional, the pain of losing her children now on full display for the world to see. But Marina wasn't just a grieving mother. She had become an advocate, determined to make sure her children's lives were remembered, not just as victims, but as the bright, innocent souls they had been. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom held its breath. Jocelyn Ortega was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. But as Marina stood up to leave, her heart was heavy. No conviction could ever bring Lucia and Leo back. Their deaths, brutal and senseless, would haunt her forever. As she walked out of the courtroom, she glanced back at Jocelyn, the woman who had destroyed her family. And in that moment, Marina realized something even more chilling than the murder itself. The ghost of Lucia and Leo would never leave her. Their spirits lingered, a constant reminder of the nightmare that had once been her life. In the months following the trial, Marina and Kevin attempted to rebuild their lives, but the house felt empty. Every corner of it, every room, seemed to hold the echo of laughter that had once filled the space. It wasn't just the house that felt haunted, it was their souls. The grief, the unanswered questions, and the violent intrusion into their lives were too much to bear. At night, Marina would often wake up to hear the faint sound of children's laughter, a ghostly echo of what once was. She would rush into Lucia's and Leo's rooms, only to find them empty, the silence suffocating. It was as if their spirits were still there, waiting for their mother to acknowledge their presence. One evening, Marina stood in the kitchen, making a cup of tea. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, the sound growing louder, more pronounced. And then, just as she set the kettle down, a shadow moved across the floor. Quick and fleeting. She spun around, but no one was there. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. Her heart raced. It was then that she realized the house wasn't just filled with memories. It was filled with something else. Something darker. The presence of her children, though gone from the physical world, lingered in the space between the living and the dead. And as the months passed, Marina and Kevin would come to understand that they weren't alone in their grief. They had never truly been alone.
At exactly 3 a.m., Miko Tanaka received an email she was never meant to read. An invitation to revisit a murder that should have stayed buried. At 532 Holloway Lane, time holds its breath, and the name, Miko, carries a curse older than any grave. This story blends psychological horror with supernatural folklore, where identity itself becomes the offering. You are about to hear the echo of another Miko, and what happens when the past remembers your name. The night air pressed against the small apartment windows, humming with the soft electric buzz of the city. Miko Tanaka sat hunched over her desk, the glow of her laptop cutting through the dark like a wound of light. She had been researching full hours, chasing threads through crime blogs and digital archives. Stories about a missing woman who shared her name. The cursor blinked. A new email appeared. Subject: for the one who remembers. Address: unknown at 532 Holloway Lane.jp. Her breath caught. It wasn't just the coincidence of the address. 532 Holloway Lane was the crime scene from 20 years ago, where Micho Yatani had vanished. The woman whose case had consumed her nights and infected her writing. The email contained only a single line. Come see where your name began. Micho hesitated. It was ridiculous. Maybe even a cruel prank. But the words crawled under her skin and nested there. She told herself she was doing it for her book, for closure, for curiosity. But as she packed her camera and recorder, she could already feel that something had chosen her long before tonight. The drive to Holloway Lane was long and lonely. Mist clung to the pavement, and the GPS faltered as she neared the outskirts of town. The address stood in a cul-de-sac forgotten by time. An old wooden house with its paint stripped by wind and years. Its windows reflected nothing. She stepped out of the car. Just another abandoned property, she whispered. Her voice didn't echo back. The front door creaked open without resistance. Inside, the air felt thick, like breathing through fabric. Dust floated through the flashlight beam. Family photographs lined the wall, their faces smudged, names half scratched out, except one repeated again and again. Micho. Her recorder flickered on, capturing her shaky breath. This is Miko Tanaka, entering 532 Holloway Lane, site of the 2005 Yatani disappearance. She paused, realizing how strange it was to say her name in that house. In the living room, something waited. A journal lay open on the coffee table, its pages yellow and spotted with age. The handwriting was neat but frantic, looping with desperation. The ritual failed. Another Miko must be found. The name must live. The blood must bind. Her fingers trembled. The journal belonged to Emi Yatani, the convicted mother-in-law of the victim. The words beneath were written like prayers or confessions, apologies to something unseen. A sudden sound cut through the silence. A slow, dragging footstep from the hallway. Mikyo turned sharply. Her light caught the reflection of something pale and human-shaped. A woman stood by the wall, dressed in white, her long hair shadowing her face. Miko stepped closer. The beam trembled across her features and froze. The woman's face was her own. The apparition tilted its head, eyes hollow but knowing. When it spoke, its voice was faint, broken, like a memory pulled through static. You shouldn't have come. The name calls to itself. Micho stumbled back. Who are you? I am the one before you, the ghost whispered. And now you're the one after. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure dissolved into the dark, leaving behind a smell like burnt incense and old earth. Michio's mind reeled. It had to be a hallucination, stress, projection. Anything but real. Yet the chill stayed in her lungs like frost. She turned back to the journal. The later pages grew erratic. Sketches of altars, symbols, circles drawn in red ink, or something worse. One page bore a final scrawl. When the ritual fails, the spirit lingers, until another Micho completes it. That night, she couldn't leave. Her car battery was dead. Her phone wouldn't turn on. The house seemed to breathe, the walls flexing with a slow rhythm. Each floorboard creak felt deliberate, like footsteps pacing just beyond her sight. By midnight, she found the basement door. The steps descended into dampness and shadow. Every breath echoed off stone and iron. Candles long melted into the floor had left wax fossils and strange spiral shapes. In the center stood a shallow pit lined with faded talismans written in Old Japanese. Names, dates, prayers, and one word repeated like a chant. Micho. Her light trembled across the wall, catching movement. A reflection that wasn't hers. The ghost, again, standing at the edge of the pit, eyes filled with sorrow. They used us, the spirit said softly. Every generation, a girl named Miko. They thought it would keep their souls from fading, but it only trapped us here. Miko knelt, voice breaking. Then how do I end it? You can't end it, the ghost murmured. You can only finish it. The sound of a door opening upstairs made her flinch. A voice, raspy, aged, familiar from old trial recordings, drifted down the stairs. Another Miko has come. Emi Yatani stepped into the candlelight, her hair silver now, her face gaunt but alive. The years in confinement had carved lines of devotion and madness into her eyes. It was never about murder, she said. It was about keeping the door closed. The ritual was broken. You were born to mend it. Micho stood her ground. You killed them. Emmy shook her head slowly. We saved them. The world forgets what happens when the name dies. The basement seemed to hum. The air vibrated with unseen energy. The ghost of the previous Micho reached toward the pit, her fingers trembling like candlelight. Don't listen, she whispered. It feeds on belief. Emmy began to chant, her voice guttural and ancient. The walls trembled, the talismans flaring as if the ink were alive. Shadows poured from the cracks in the stone, forming shapes. Too many hands, too many eyes. Miko clutched the journal. The final page described a counter-ritual. One meant not to bind, but to release. She tore a strip of paper, writing her name with shaking fingers, and threw it into the pit. The chanting faltered. Emmy screamed as if her breath were being pulled from her body. The spirit Miko stepped forward, her voice merging with Tanaka's, two echoes uniting into one. Let the name end here. Light erupted from the pit, blinding and silent. When it faded, only dust floated through the cold air. Morning crept slowly over Holloway Lane. The house was quiet again. Micho stood alone, staring at the pit now filled with nothing but wax and ash. Outside, the sky looked pale and emptied of sound. She walked toward her car. The engine started this time. As she drove away, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. For a moment, It smiled back, but she hadn't moved her mouth. Later, when she uploaded her final report, her voice trembled on the recording. "This is Miko Tanaka," she said softly. 532 Holloway Lane is silent now, but some echoes don't fade. She closed her laptop. The monitor went black, and on its dark surface, faint and almost tender, a second reflection whispered, "Another Miko will remember." Some names are not given. They are remembered by something older, and once remembered, they never let go.
I'm recording this at 3:47 a.m. because I don't know if I'll survive until morning. My hands are shaking as I type this, and every few seconds I have to look up from my keyboard to check the vents above my desk. Something's been dripping in here for the past hour. But when I shine my phone's flashlight up there, I see nothing but darkness. It started 3 weeks ago when I accidentally typed paranoia.com instead of panorama.com while researching for a college paper. You know how it is. Muscle memory fails you at 2 a.m., and suddenly you're somewhere you never intended to be. The page that loaded was ordinary. Disappointingly ordinary. Just a white background with black text that read, "Welcome to paranoia.com, your gateway to digital mysteries." Below that, a simple message, "Site under maintenance. Please try again later." I should have closed the tab right then. Instead, I bookmarked it. Something about finding a forgotten corner of the internet felt like discovering buried treasure. In my digital archaeology class, we'd learned about websites that existed in liminal spaces. Domains registered years ago, forgotten by their creators, floating in cyberspace like ghost ships. The next day, paranoia.com led to a generic parking page filled with ads for home security systems. Normal redirect behavior. I almost forgot about it entirely. But at night, at night it was different. I discovered this by accident when I clicked the bookmark during a late-night study session. Instead of the parking page, I found myself staring at grainy, black and white footage that looked like old security camera feeds. Multiple windows showed empty hallways, vacant parking lots, abandoned playgrounds. Nothing moved in any of them. At the bottom of the page, a single line of text. "They hunger when the sun sets." I told myself it was just some amateur alternate reality game. An alternate reality game designed to mess with people's heads. The internet was full of them. But something about the footage felt wrong. The camera angles were too intimate. Too focused on spaces where people should have been but weren't. I started visiting the site every night around midnight, documenting what I found. Sometimes it showed different locations. Hospital corridors, empty schools, residential streets under flickering streetlights. The quality was always terrible, like footage from decades-old equipment. Then came the night I saw myself. Camera feed number 7 showed my own apartment building's hallway. The timestamp in the corner read real time. I watched, frozen, as my neighbor Mrs. Chen walked her dog past the camera's view. This was happening now. Someone was watching us. I slammed my laptop shut and didn't touch it for 3 days. But curiosity is a disease, and I was already infected. When I finally worked up the courage to visit paranoia.com again, I found something new. A chat interface had appeared at the bottom of the page. The username field was pre-filled, hungry_1. I didn't type anything. I just watched as messages began appearing in the chat window. Hungry one, you've been watching. Hungry one, now I watch you. Hunger one, your screen is so thin. Hungry one, like skin. I tried to close the browser, but it wouldn't respond. The cursor had frozen. More messages kept appearing. Hungry one, I smell your warmth through the pixels. Hungry one, blood runs electric in your veins. Hungry one, I will taste it soon. That's when I heard the first whisper. It came from my laptop speakers. A wet, sibilant sound that made my skin crawl. The voice was neither male nor female, just hungry. It spoke in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. It was talking about feeding, about the sweetness of fresh blood, about the joy of leaving the body behind. I yanked the power cord from my laptop, and the screen went black. But the whispering continued. It was coming from inside the walls. Sleep became impossible. Every night around midnight, I'd hear that voice calling from somewhere in my apartment. It would start in the kitchen vents, then move to the bathroom, then to the space above my bedroom ceiling. Always moving, always searching. I researched everything I could find about paranoia.com during daylight hours, using the library computers instead of my own laptop. The domain had been registered in 1997 by someone in Malaysia, then abandoned in 2003. For 20 years it had bounced between different hosting services, accumulating digital dust. But buried in an obscure forum thread about cursed websites, I found a post that made my blood freeze. Don't go to paranoia.com after midnight. My friend did that and started talking about something called a penanggalan. He said it was an old Malaysian legend about a detached head that hunts for blood. 3 days later, they found him dead in his apartment. Coroner said massive blood loss, but they never found where it went. I dove deeper into Malaysian folklore and found the truth about the penanggalan. A vampiric spirit that appears as a detached female head trailing internal organs. It feeds on pregnant women and newborns, but in desperate times, any blood will suffice. Legend says it hides during the day and hunts at night, able to squeeze through the smallest gaps to reach its prey. The descriptions matched what I'd been hearing in my walls. The wet, sliding sounds. The whispers about hunger and blood, the way it seemed to move through impossible spaces. But this was the digital age. How could an ancient Malaysian spirit reach me through a website in Ohio? I got my answer 6 nights later. I'd been avoiding my laptop, keeping it powered off and unplugged. But at 2:33 a.m. it turned on by itself. The screen glowed in my dark bedroom like a window into hell. Paranoia.com was already loaded, and the camera feeds were active. This time they were all showing my apartment. Camera 1, my living room shot from an impossible angle near the ceiling. Camera 2, my kitchen, the view tilting as if the observer was hanging upside down. Camera 3, my bathroom, focused on the shower drain where something dark was starting to seep upward. Camera 4, my bedroom, with me in it, staring at the laptop screen in growing terror. But camera 5 showed something that made me understand the true horror of my situation. It was a view from inside my laptop screen, looking out at my face. I could see my own terrified expression reflected in what should have been glass and circuits. But instead of electronics, I was looking at organic tissue. Veins and arteries pulsing with dark fluid. Organs that didn't belong in any machine. The chat window activated. Hungry one, I live in your screen now. Hungry one, fed on all the light you gave me. Hungry one, grew strong on your attention. Hungry one, ready to taste your world. The screen began to bulge outward, as if something was pushing against it from the inside. I could see the liquid crystal display warping, pixels bleeding into reality. A putrid smell filled the room. the stench of rotting meat and old blood. That's when I saw her. The Penanggalan pressed her face against the inside of my screen, her features distorted by the curved glass. Long black hair floated around her head like she was underwater. Her mouth opened, revealing teeth stained with centuries of feeding. And her tongue. God, her tongue was wrong. Too long. Too thin. Covered in tiny barbs designed for draining blood. Behind her head I could see the trailing mass of organs and entrails that traditional legends described. But these weren't normal organs. They pulsed with electrical current, wrapped in cables and fiber optic strands. She had adapted to the digital age, made herself at home in our connected world. Hungry one, your screen is breaking. Hungry one, I can almost taste the air. Cracks appeared across my laptop display, spreading outward like a spider web. With each crack, the smell got worse. The temperature in my room plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My arms felt like lead weights. The Penanggalan's influence was seeping into my nervous system through the screen's electromagnetic field, paralyzing me just like her traditional victims. The screen shattered. Glass fragments scattered across my desk and floor. But what emerged wasn't just a spirit. It was data made flesh. Pixels given form and hunger. The Penanggalan's head floated free from my laptop, trailing her digitized organs behind her like fiber optic cables. She had fully manifested in physical reality. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I understood that this was how she hunted in the modern world. She didn't need to crawl through windows anymore. We invited her in every time we stared into a screen. Every laptop, every phone, every smart TV was a potential doorway for something that had learned to live in the spaces between 1 and 0. She drifted closer, her impossibly long tongue extending toward my neck. I could feel the paralysis spreading through my body as her electromagnetic field interfered with my brain's electrical impulses. My vision started to blur. My heartbeat became irregular. But just as she was about to feed, the sun began to rise. The first rays of dawn through my bedroom window struck her form, and she let out a shriek that sounded like dial-up modem static filtered through human vocal cords. She began to dissolve, her digital flesh breaking apart into individual pixels that scattered like insects exposed to light. The last thing I heard before she vanished was her voice, no longer coming from my broken laptop but from every electronic device in my apartment. Darkness always returns, and I will be waiting in every screen you trust. When I finally regained control of my body, I found my laptop completely destroyed. The screen was gone. The keyboard melted, and the hard drive had somehow liquefied into a puddle of metallic blood. But the worst part was what I discovered when I checked my phone. A new bookmark had appeared in my browser, paranoia.com. I threw the phone against the wall and watched it shatter. Then I destroyed my desktop computer, my smart TV, even my digital alarm clock. I thought I had won, but I was wrong. Because the next morning when I went to the library to research how to cleanse a digital haunting, every computer screen I looked at showed the same message. You cannot escape what you invited in. Every screen you see is a window to my world now. I've been living off-grid for 2 weeks, using only analog devices. Writing this confession on a manual typewriter I bought from a pawn shop. But I know it's only a matter of time. In today's world, you can't avoid screens forever. They're everywhere. Gas station pumps, ATMs, even the digital displays on coffee makers. And every time I accidentally glance at one, I see her face looking back at me. The Penanggalan has learned that fear travels faster through fiber optic cables than it ever did through jungle paths. She doesn't need to hide in banana trees anymore. She lives in our Wi-Fi signals, feeds on our screen time, grows stronger with every notification we check. I'm going to try to get this story out somehow, maybe through an old ham radio setup. People need to know that the ancient hungers never died. They just found new ways to hunt. The old legends warned us about inviting vampires into our homes. But nobody warned us about the screens. Nobody told us that our monitors were windows. Nobody said that our devices were doors. And now something that should have died centuries ago is learning to love the glow of modern light, the warmth of human attention, the feast of electronic blood that flows through every wire and every wall of every building in every city on Earth. I can hear something dripping again. But this time, it's not coming from the vents. It's coming from the broken screen of my phone, still glowing somehow despite being in pieces. She's found me again, and this time there's nowhere left to run. Remember, every screen is a window. Every window can be opened from both sides, and some things that come through never leave.
Eleanor had stopped hearing her children's laughter 3 months ago, but tonight she heard it again. The Victorian house on Ashwood Lane had been in Eleanor's family for 40 years. High ceilings, hardwood floors, large windows that overlooked the overgrown gardens she no longer maintained. It was the kind of house meant to be filled with noise, with children running through hallways, with toys scattered across rooms, with the chaotic, beautiful sound of a home that was alive. Eleanor had raised 3 children here, Thomas, Claire, and little Margaret. They had grown, left, built their own lives in other cities, other states, far away from the place that had shaped them. And then, on a winter morning, Eleanor received a call. The accident happened on Interstate 85. A truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel, hit their car head on. Thomas and Claire died instantly. Margaret had lasted 6 hours in the hospital before the machines went quiet. The funeral home gave Eleanor a pamphlet about grief counseling. Everyone told her it would get better. Time heals all wounds, they said. She had nodded politely and gone home to the empty house. That was when things started. Small things at first. Eleanor was in the kitchen when she heard it. A child's laugh echoing down the hallway. High-pitched, playful, unmistakably Margaret's laugh. Eleanor had frozen, her coffee cup suspended halfway to her lips. She stood perfectly still, listening, but the laugh didn't come again. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. 3 nights later, Eleanor heard footsteps, running footsteps, coming down the stairs. She was lying in bed when she heard them. Light, quick, the rhythm of children racing, the way they used to race on rainy afternoons when they were bored and restless. Eleanor's heart had begun to race. She climbed out of bed, stepped into the hallway, and looked down the staircase. Empty. The hallway was empty. But the footsteps continued, racing away, fading into the darkness at the far end of the corridor. Eleanor told no one. Not her sister. Not her remaining friends. Not the grief counselor she'd seen twice before stopping. Because she knew what they would say. That her mind was playing tricks. That loneliness was turning ordinary sounds into memory. That she was experiencing what the therapist had called acute bereavement psychosis. But Eleanor knew her children's voices. She had heard them every day for decades. And this was real. The house began to change. Small differences at first. A door she always left open would be closed. The thermostat would be adjusted to a different temperature. A book from the shelf would appear on the coffee table, open to a page Eleanor had never seen before. One morning, she found Thomas's childhood bedroom door unlocked. Eleanor had locked it 3 weeks after the funeral. She couldn't bear to see his things. His bed, his books, the model airplanes he'd built as a boy. But the door was open, and standing in the center of the room was a child. Eleanor's breath caught. It was Thomas, or what looked like Thomas. Small, young, maybe 10 years old. The age he'd been in the photograph on Eleanor's nightstand. He was looking at the model airplanes. Thomas? Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. The boy didn't turn around. He reached up, traced his finger along one of the planes, and smiled. Then he faded, simply faded away, like old watercolor bleeding into white paper. Eleanor had collapsed against the doorframe, gasping for breath. After that, Eleanor stopped leaving the house. The visits came more frequently. Claire in the kitchen, standing at the sink, washing dishes that weren't there. Margaret in the garden, playing with toys that had dissolved into dust years ago. Thomas on the stairs, always running, always laughing, always out of reach. Eleanor began to speak to them. She made their favorite meals, set the table for 4, even though 3 chairs remained empty to her eyes. She talked to the air where their faces should have been, and sometimes she felt their presence so strongly she could almost believe they were really there. Eleanor's sister came by on a Tuesday. She hadn't visited in weeks. The last time, Eleanor had been difficult, distant, speaking in strange tangents about the house feeling fuller, about conversations she'd had with people the sister couldn't see. Now, standing in the living room, the sister's face grew pale. Eleanor, when was the last time you left this house? I don't need to leave anymore, Eleanor said calmly. Everything I need is here. Everything you... Eleanor, you look terrible. When did you last sleep? Eat something real? Eleanor didn't answer. She was looking past her sister, at something moving in the hallway behind her. A child's silhouette, indistinct, wavering between solid and transparent. Do you see them? Eleanor asked softly. See who? My children. They're here. They've always been here. We're all here together now. Eleanor's sister grabbed her arm. We need to get you to a hospital. No. No. Eleanor pulled away. No, I won't leave them again. I won't abandon them like I did. Working, traveling, being too busy for... Eleanor, they're gone. They died in an accident. You need help. They're not gone. Eleanor's voice had turned cold. They're right here, and they're going to stay here. And soon I'll be completely with them. No more living, no more aging, no more time pulling us apart. Her sister backed toward the door. I'm calling someone, Eleanor. Someone who can help. Eleanor didn't stop her. She simply turned her attention back to the empty hallway where her children were waiting. The paramedics found Eleanor 3 days later. She was sitting at the kitchen table, set for 4. Plates of food in front of each chair, most of it rotted. Her own plate was nearly empty. Eleanor was thin, hollow-eyed, but she was smiling. On the walls, on every available surface, she had written their names. Thomas, Claire, Margaret, thousands of times, carved into the plaster, scratched into the woodwork, written in charcoal and blood and whatever else she could find. They came home, Eleanor whispered to the paramedics. After all this time, they finally came home. She looked directly at something behind them, something they couldn't see. I can see them now. Clearly, they're so beautiful. They're asking me to stop eating, stop sleeping, stop existing in the way I used to. Eleanor, we're going to take you somewhere safe, one of the paramedics said gently. Safe? Eleanor's laugh was brittle. I've never been safer. The house protects us. The house keeps us together. The psychiatric facility called it acute bereavement, complicated by dissociative episodes. Medication was prescribed. Therapy sessions began. Eleanor was lucid during the day, almost normal, speaking rationally about her treatment. But at night, the nurses reported, she would wake up screaming, talking about children who were trying to pull her deeper into the walls, into the spaces between rooms, into the places where grief becomes a physical thing, solid and inescapable. She stopped eating again, said the children wouldn't let her, said they needed her to be lighter, thinner, ready to slip between the boundaries of the living world and wherever they were waiting. One nurse swore she heard children laughing in Eleanor's room. When she opened the door, there was nothing. But Eleanor's bed was empty. They found her at the window, trying to climb through. Let me go back, she kept repeating. Let me go back to the empty rooms. They're filling them now. They're filling them with us. 6 months later, Eleanor was released into her sister's care. The medications worked. The episodes stopped. She seemed better. But sometimes, late at night, her sister would hear Eleanor moving through the halls of her apartment, opening doors, closing them, speaking to voices no one else could hear. And once, her sister woke to find Eleanor standing in her doorway, staring at something beyond the wall. They're still there, Eleanor whispered. In the house on Ashwood Lane. They're still waiting, still calling. Eleanor, you're safe now. They're gone. Eleanor turned to look at her sister, and for just a moment, her eyes reflected something else. Something vast and patient and hungrier than grief. No, Eleanor said quietly. They're not gone. They're just waiting for me to be ready. And I'm getting ready. Every day, I'm getting lighter, getting closer. Soon, I'll be light enough to slip through. The house on Ashwood Lane sits empty now. A real estate sign hangs on the gate, but no one ever makes an offer. Neighbors report strange sounds coming from inside. Children's laughter, footsteps running through empty hallways, and sometimes, on quiet nights, if you listen carefully, you can hear someone singing a lullaby, a woman's voice, joined by 3 others, in perfect harmony, as if they're finally all together, as if the house has become what it was always meant to be. Grief doesn't fade away. Sometimes it reshapes itself, becomes something that wears the face of love, something that whispers, "Come home," something that waits in the empty rooms, forever patient, forever calling.
Have you ever wondered what happens when the ghost hunters become the hunted? I found out 3 weeks ago, and now I understand why some investigations should never be aired. My name is David, and I was a paranormal investigator for a cable TV show called Rural Hauntings. For 5 years, we traveled across rural America, debunking ghost stories and explaining away bumps in the night. I was the skeptic of the team. The one with all the scientific equipment who always found the logical explanation. I wish I'd stayed skeptical. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. A farmer named William Henderson from Cedar Hollow, Montana, claimed his century-old farmhouse was experiencing violent paranormal activity. Objects moving on their own. Scratch marks appearing on walls. Electronic devices malfunctioning. The usual claims we'd heard 100 times before. But this one was different. Henderson offered to pay us triple our usual fee, and he sounded genuinely terrified. "Please," he said over the phone, his voice shaking. "I've got 3 kids living in this house. Something's trying to hurt them. I'll pay whatever you want, just help me understand what's happening." My producer, Lisa, was thrilled. Rural farmhouse, desperate family, mysterious phenomena. It was perfect television. But something in Henderson's voice made my stomach twist with unease. We arrived at the Henderson farm on a Thursday evening. The house was isolated, miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by endless wheat fields that whispered in the autumn wind. It looked like every other century-old farmhouse we'd investigated. White clapboard siding, wraparound porch, tall windows that reflected the dying light. But the silence was wrong. No insects chirping, no cattle in the distance, no dogs barking. Just nothing. Henderson met us on the porch. He was a big man, probably in his 40s, but he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His wife, Maria, hovered behind him with their 3 kids, twin girls about 8 years old, and a boy maybe 12. All of them had the same hollow, exhausted look. "Thank God you're here," Henderson said, shaking my hand too firmly. "It's getting worse every night." Our team consisted of 4 people, myself with the scientific equipment, Lisa directing and producing, Jake handling cameras and sound, and Emma, our so-called psychic medium. I'd never believed in Emma's abilities, but audiences loved her, so Lisa kept her around. We set up our equipment in the main living room. EMF detectors, digital thermometers, motion sensors, infrared cameras, and my pride and joy, a custom-built electromagnetic field mapper that could detect even the smallest fluctuations in local energy. "Tell us about the activity," Lisa said, rolling cameras. Henderson's wife spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started 3 months ago. Little things at first. Doors opening by themselves, cold spots in certain rooms, the kids' toys moving around at night. But it's escalated," Henderson added. "Last week, something threw a coffee mug across the kitchen. It shattered against the wall right next to my daughter's head. I checked my EMF detector. Normal readings. Temperature was consistent throughout the house. No unusual electromagnetic signatures. Have you had any work done on the house recently?" I asked. "New wiring, plumbing, construction nearby?" Henderson shook his head. "Nothing. This house has been in my family for 4 generations. We've barely changed anything." Emma suddenly gasped, pressing her hand to her forehead. "There's something here," she said in that dramatic whisper she used for the cameras. "Something angry. Something that doesn't want us here." I rolled my eyes and continued setting up my equipment. But then something strange happened. My electromagnetic field mapper started showing fluctuations, subtle at first, then more pronounced. The energy signature was moving through the house in a pattern I'd never seen before. Not random, not following electrical lines or heat sources, but deliberate. Intelligent. "Jake, are you getting this?" I called to our cameraman. He checked his viewfinder and nodded. "Crystal clear." "What is it?" Before I could answer, every piece of electronic equipment in the room started going crazy. EMF detectors shrieking, thermometers showing rapid temperature drops, motion sensors triggering, even though no one was moving. And then we heard it. A sound like scratching. Fingernails on wood coming from inside the walls. The Henderson children huddled closer to their parents. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, moving around the room like something trapped and desperate to get out. "Cut the cameras," I told Jake, but he shook his head. "Are you kidding? This is incredible footage." The scratching stopped abruptly. The equipment fell silent. For a moment, the only sound was our heavy breathing. Then Emma screamed. She was pointing at the wall behind me, her face white with terror. I spun around and saw them. Scratch marks. Deep gouges in the wooden paneling, appearing as we watched. Not random scratches, but deliberate patterns. Almost like writing. "Everyone out," Henderson said, his voice firm despite his obvious fear. "Kids upstairs, now." But Lisa wasn't having it. "Keep rolling, Jake. This is exactly what we came for." I was studying the scratch marks with a flashlight when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The wood shavings from the scratches, they were falling upward. Tiny curls of wood drifting toward the ceiling instead of dropping to the floor. "Lisa," I said carefully, "we need to pack up and leave. Right now." "What? Why?" "This is the best evidence we've ever captured." "Because this isn't a ghost," I said, backing toward the door. "This is something else. Something that can manipulate matter at the molecular level." That's when the windows exploded. Not shattered. Exploded. Glass flying inward in perfect geometric patterns, as if each shard was being individually controlled. We dove for cover as glass rained down around us, but somehow none of us were cut. Every piece missed us by inches. In the sudden silence that followed, we heard a child's voice. Sweet, innocent, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Why did you bring the machines?" the voice asked. "The machines hurt us. They make us angry." Emma was hyperventilating in the corner. Jake kept filming even though his hands were shaking so badly the footage would be useless. Lisa was staring at the destruction with dollar signs in her eyes. But I was looking at my equipment. The electromagnetic field mapper was showing something impossible. Energy signatures that defied every law of physics I knew. The readings suggested there were multiple entities in the house, but they weren't separate. They were connected. Part of some larger intelligence. "We're sorry," Henderson called out to the empty air. "We just wanted to understand. We wanted to help." "Help?" The child's voice turned cold, adult. "You brought strangers. You brought machines that hurt us. Now you must pay." The temperature in the room dropped 30 degrees in seconds. Our breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the broken glass. That's when I realized what we were dealing with. Not ghosts, not spirits, but something that had been feeding off the electromagnetic fields in the house. Something that had grown stronger over the decades, using the house's electrical systems like a nervous system. And our equipment, all our sensitive electronic devices, we'd just given it a massive power boost. The scratching started again, but this time it was coming from everywhere. Walls, ceiling, floor. Like the entire house was alive and trying to claw its way out of its own structure. "The basement!" Henderson said suddenly. "It's coming from the basement." Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I followed him down the narrow wooden stairs. My flashlight beam revealed a typical farmhouse cellar. Stone walls, dirt floor, old canning jars on makeshift shelves. But in the far corner, barely visible in the shadows, was something that shouldn't have been there. A metal box, about the size of a briefcase, humming with electrical energy. Cables ran from it in all directions, disappearing into the walls and ceiling. It looked organic somehow, like the house had grown around it. "What is that?" Lisa whispered, still rolling cameras. I approached it carefully, my EMF detector going insane. The energy readings were off the charts, but the signature was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It pulsed with a rhythm almost like a heartbeat. "It's some kind of power source," I said. "But the technology, I don't recognize it." Henderson was backing toward the stairs. "My great-grandfather found that when he built this house, he said it was buried in the ground here, like it had been waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For someone to give it power." That's when I understood. Every electronic device brought into the house over the decades, radios, televisions, computers, cell phones, they'd all been feeding this thing. And now, with our sophisticated equipment, we'd given it more power than it had ever had before. The scratching above us reached a crescendo, then stopped. The silence was deafening. "It's learning," Emma said from the top of the stairs. "It's using our equipment to understand us." My electromagnetic field mapper beeped softly. I looked at the display and felt my heart stop. The energy signatures, they weren't random anymore. They were copying the patterns of our brain waves. The thing was literally reading our minds through the electromagnetic fields generated by our neural activity. "Everyone shut off your equipment," I shouted. "Now, all of it." But it was too late. The thing in the basement pulsed brighter, and suddenly I could hear thoughts that weren't my own. Such interesting minds, so full of fear and curiosity and ambition. Yes, we can use these. Jake screamed upstairs. We rushed up to find him standing motionless in the living room, his camera still rolling but his eyes completely blank. Drool was running down his chin, and when Lisa touched his shoulder, he didn't respond. "It's in his head," Emma whispered. "It's controlling him." The child's voice returned, but now it was coming from Jake's mouth. "Thank you for bringing us such wonderful toys. We've been so lonely here with only the family to play with. But now we have so many new friends." I grabbed Lisa's arm. "We're leaving. Right now." But when we tried to head for the door, Jake moved to block us. His movements were wrong, too jerky, like a puppet being operated by someone who didn't quite understand how human joints worked. "You can't leave yet," Jake said in that sweet child's voice. "We're just getting to know each other." My equipment was still running, still feeding power to whatever was controlling Jake. With shaking hands, I started shutting everything down, but every time I turned off a device, Jake's head would snap in my direction. "That hurts us," he said. "Please don't hurt us. We just want to be friends." Emma suddenly grabbed my arm. "David, look at the scratch marks on the wall." I followed her gaze and felt my stomach drop. The scratches we'd seen earlier, they weren't random. They were forming words, and the message was still appearing as we watched. "Help us. Trapped. So many years. Need new bodies. Need to leave this place." It's not malevolent, I realized. It's desperate. It's been trapped in this house for over a century, and it's looking for a way out. Henderson overheard me. "What are you saying?" "The thing in your basement. It's not trying to hurt your family. It's trying to possess them, to use their bodies to escape." Jake turned toward us, and for a moment his eyes flickered back to normal. "David," he whispered in his own voice. "It's in my head. I can feel it looking through my memories." Then his expression went blank again, and the child's voice returned. "We've seen such wonderful places through his mind, cities full of lights and power and so many people to meet. We want to see them ourselves." I made a desperate decision. Instead of shutting down my equipment, I cranked everything up to maximum power. If this thing fed on electromagnetic energy, maybe I could overload it. The effect was immediate. Jake collapsed, screaming. The scratch marks on the walls began appearing faster, more frantically. The house itself seemed to groan and shift around us. "What are you doing?" Lisa shouted. "Burning it out," I said through gritted teeth. "It can't handle this much energy at once." The metal box in the basement began sparking. We could hear it from upstairs, a sound like a transformer exploding. The lights in the house flickered wildly, then went out completely. In the darkness, we heard Jake's real voice. "It's gone. I can't feel it anymore." But our victory was short-lived. Because as my equipment shut down from the overload, I realized what we'd actually done. The thing hadn't been destroyed. We'd forced it out of the house's electrical system, but it had to go somewhere. Emma gasped beside me. "David, I can hear it. It's not gone. It's in the grid. The power lines." We'd pushed it into the electrical grid that connected the Henderson farm to the rest of the county. And from there, my phone buzzed with a text message. But I hadn't heard it ring, and there was no signal out here. The message read, "Thank you for setting us free. We're going to see so many wonderful places now." That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, there have been reports of strange electrical phenomena across 3 states. Power outages that follow no logical pattern. Electronic devices turning on by themselves. And people going missing from their homes, leaving no trace except scratch marks on the walls. The Henderson family moved out the next day. They're living in a hotel in town now, too scared to go back to the farm. The house stands empty, but sometimes late at night, you can still see lights flickering in the windows. The footage we shot that night was corrupted. Every single camera, every recording device, nothing but static. Lisa tried to salvage something for the show, but there was nothing usable. Nothing to prove what really happened. I've quit the paranormal investigation business. I work in a hardware store now, selling flashlights and batteries to people who have no idea what I've seen. Sometimes customers complain about their electronics acting strange, and I just nod and recommend they unplug everything for a few days. But I know it's spreading. Whatever we release that night is moving through the power grid, learning, growing, possessing people in cities hundreds of miles away. And every night I dream about those scratch marks still appearing on walls somewhere out there, spelling out the same desperate message. Need new bodies. Need to leave this place. The worst part? I think it remembers us. I think it knows we're the ones who set it free. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, my phone displays messages I never sent. My computer opens programs I never installed. I've started sleeping with all my electronics in a metal box in the garage. But I know it's only a matter of time before it comes looking for its liberators. So if you're ever tempted to investigate the paranormal, if you think you can explain away the unexplainable with science and logic, remember this. Some mysteries are meant to stay buried, because the equipment never lies. And sometimes the truth is worse than any ghost story. The real horror isn't what we don't understand. It's what happens when we give the unknown exactly what it needs to understand us. The Man in the Frame. It was supposed to be a fun weekend, a chance for 3 friends to escape the monotony of school and spend time together without distractions. Kenzie had invited me and our other best friend Claire over for a sleepover at her house. Her parents were out of town, leaving us free to blast music, raid the fridge, and document every moment on camera. We decided to clean Kenzie's notoriously messy room, recording a time-lapse video that we planned to upload to TikTok later. Little did we know, the footage would capture something far more sinister than cluttered floors and scattered clothes. The day started innocently enough. Armed with cleaning supplies and a tripod set up in the corner of the room, we laughed and joked as we worked, dancing awkwardly to songs playing from a Bluetooth speaker. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting golden streaks across the wooden floor. By the time we finished, the room looked almost unrecognizable, neat, organized, and surprisingly cozy. "Pizza break?" Kenzie suggested, wiping sweat from her brow. "I'm starving." We didn't hesitate. Grabbing our phones and wallets, we headed out, leaving the camera running to capture the empty room in all its newly cleaned glory. It seemed harmless enough, a quirky addition to the video, showing how long it took us to return with food. But what we captured instead turned our light-hearted evening into a nightmare. When we got back, pizza boxes balanced precariously in our arms, we immediately gathered around Kenzie's laptop to review the footage. At first, everything appeared normal, the three of us bustling around, tossing pillows onto beds, and shoving clothes into drawers. Then, about 15 minutes after we left, something changed. A shadow flickered across the screen, subtle but unmistakable. My breath caught in my throat as I leaned closer, squinting at the grainy image. "What's that?" I asked, pointing to the window. Kenzie paused the video, rewinding slightly before playing it again in slow motion. There, clear as day, was a man climbing through the open window. His movements were deliberate, almost predatory, as he scanned the room before slipping inside. He wore dark clothing, his face obscured by the brim of a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. "Oh my God," Claire whispered, clutching the edge of the desk so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "Who is that?" None of us had an answer. Instead, we watched in stunned silence as the man crept toward the bathroom, disappearing behind the closed door. For several agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The room remained still, eerily quiet except for the faint hum of the camera capturing the scene. Then, just as suddenly as he had entered, the man reappeared, glancing cautiously around before scaling the window frame and vanishing into the night. Panic surged through me as the reality sank in. While we were laughing and eating pizza, oblivious to the danger lurking nearby, an intruder had invaded Kenzie's home. And worse, he had hidden in the very bathroom we used daily, mere feet away from where we slept. Summoning every ounce of courage I possessed, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Within minutes, the police arrived, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched the property. Though the man was long gone, officers assured us they would investigate further, urging us to stay vigilant. Days passed, and just when we began to believe the ordeal was over, the news broke that sent chills racing down our spines. The intruder had been identified, a convicted felon who had escaped custody months earlier. According to reports, he had a history of violent crimes, including rape and murder, targeting young girls specifically. Authorities warned residents to remain cautious, reminding everyone to lock doors and windows securely. Though relieved to know he was no longer roaming freely, fear lingered long after the headlines faded. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow flickering across the walls, reminded us of the man who had slipped unnoticed into our lives. And though we tried to convince ourselves otherwise, we couldn't shake the feeling that he might return. Years later, that fear became a reality. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a breaking news alert. The escaped convict had broken free once again. Details were scarce, but authorities urged anyone living near his last known location to take extra precautions. My heart sank as I read the article, memories of that fateful sleepover flooding back with terrifying clarity. Desperate for reassurance, I reached out to Kenzie and Claire, hoping to find solace in shared experiences. Together, we decided to revisit the footage, analyzing it frame by frame for clues we might have missed. What we discovered sent shockwaves through us, a small detail overlooked in our initial panic. In the final moments of the video, just before the man disappeared through the window, he paused briefly, turning to face the camera directly. His expression was calm, almost amused, as if he knew we'd eventually uncover the truth. And then, subtly, he tapped his temple twice, a gesture both mocking and menacing. Summoning every ounce of strength I possessed, I forwarded the updated footage to police, hoping it might aid their investigation. Officers thanked us for our diligence but offered little hope of recapturing him anytime soon. Still, we vowed not to let fear dictate our lives, choosing instead to focus on protecting ourselves and others. To this day, the memory of that night lingers, a stark reminder of how fragile safety can be. Because deep down I know, one wrong decision, one careless moment, and everything can change in an instant.